Hello. I told y'all I would be doing a live stream about 6, so here I am. I'm at Mulligan Farm, and I'm actually out in the big field. That seemed like a nice place to film, even though now that I'm out here, I don't know that you can see much. We've been trying to work on starting a podcast, and I am still kind of sorting out the equipment for that. But in doing different posts talking about the fact that we're going to start these, we've gotten some requests on some issues. And so one of the things yesterday that one of the followers and actually a volunteer suggested we talk about was kill pens, auctions, and brokers. And that's a big issue for us. It's always been something that was a sore spot, maybe that would be the thing to say, for me personally. So I wanted to give you a bit of background as to why I know so much about auctions, how I know more than most people do about kill buyers, and why that's relevant, and how social media and Facebook particularly, especially if we go back 10 years, has worked toward undoing the truth. And so now it's almost hard for somebody who comes to it these days to know what's accurate and what's inaccurate, dispelling myths and from the facts. So I grew up in southern West Virginia with my grandfather, who was a horse trader. He didn't mean anything bad by being a horse trader. That's just what he knew culturally. He'd buy a pony, he'd sell a pony. He'd buy a horse, he'd sell a horse. That's what he did. Trades and selling, and trade for guns, and trade for four-wheelers, and so forth. So that was my introduction to the horse world from the age of memory. So 5, 6 years old. That's what I knew. I went with my grandfather to horse auctions all over West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio all of my childhood. For me, I loved horses, and that was a way to have interaction with horses. And as a child, I didn't know any better. So what I was able to learn from that, and part of it was I really didn't know what I was learning at the time. It's in hindsight. I learned that the type of horse that sells and sold then is still the type of horse that sells. I learned the tricks and the language of the trader. I learned the type of horse that sells cheap, and I learned the type of horse that sells to the kill buyer. Now, the type of horse that sells super cheap is not typically or necessarily the type of horse that sells to the kill buyer. The type of horse that sells cheap is usually very underweight and ill, obviously ill and thin. And so those types of horses are bought by really, really, really low-end horse traders that aren't even horse people necessarily. They're the kinds of people that will collect free dogs and free cats and free animals of any kind, and aren't able to financially support any of those animals. So typically, back then, now these days rescues can get involved and they may purchase those horses, but at this point, 20 years ago and 30 years ago, 35 years ago, what you would see is those super inexpensive animals that were selling. And there have always been cheap animals at horse auctions. I have seen $25 and $50 ponies and horses going back 30 years. You'll hear people say the economy tanked for this reason and that reason in the horse industry, and so that's when cheap horses came about. No, that's not true. There's always been a point where horses sold cheap, and there have always been horses that sold so cheap that kill buyers, and we'll talk more about what kill buyers mean, versus traders versus brokers. There have always been super, super inexpensive horses. There always have been. Now, that said, the $25 and the $50 horse were not necessarily then nor now the horses that were in danger of slaughter. They were in danger of horrific things and meeting a gruesome end, but it wasn't slaughter that they were facing. You would have the horses then that were brought in that were healthy, of a lameness that maybe wasn't super evident, or maybe it was, but the weight expensive horses and minis and so forth that were there. So we would see those horses going through at $300, $400, $500, and this is, back then as well. They were horses that also could be unhandled but healthy. Often, actually, they would be horses that were brought in that people had bred excess numbers of mares, hadn't handled the offspring, and ran them in a trailer. And so those were horses that were going to be in danger of going to the kill buyer. Now, who is the kill buyer? Well, a lot of people that have gone to auctions actually haven't necessarily encountered a kill buyer. There aren't many licensed kill buyers that actually are licensed to haul horses for meat. The auction I frequented most happened to be owned by a kill buyer who actually was. That's what he did. So when you would bring horses to sale, if it was a really thin horse, he didn't buy that horse. He would make offers on the horses that he knew either had a lameness issue or not really handled. Or in some instances, though far, far less common, somebody who did just have a nice horse that they let him buy right off the truck. Here's where nothing that I'm telling you right now is that shocking. I mean, you may all know this, but this is where I knew early on that the kill pen schemes and the broker schemes were schemes, and why Heart of Phoenix has never taken part in purchasing animals from those types of situations. So, when a kill buyer is in operation, and that's how he's earning his living primarily, he has a contract and then there's a quota, he's going to fill it, period. So, you could actually be there, which I had been, and our vice president, Jesse, many times. You could show up there and you would know the pen that was the meat pen. And, you could be swayed and say, I'd really like to help this horse or that horse. And you could say to him, the owner, I'd like to buy this horse. I'll give you more than you paid. And he would say, no, I'm not going to do that. I have a contract to fill, and these horses are going on a trailer tonight. So unless he overbought, which he didn't tend to do, he wasn't going to sell you those horses. And it was before social media made that a profitable scam. So he didn't buy excess numbers to resell to people who were looking to rescue. He didn't do that. And so as I watched the rise of the broker lot and the kill pen, I already knew this isn't what they're pretending it is. I know what's going on, and I wouldn't have anything to do with that. So 10 years ago, 11 years ago, what we used to know, the primary lot was Camelot. And rescues were they were bringing in large amounts of donations to rescue these horses that were allegedly shipping to slaughter, and far more being posted than actually ever were going to ship. They were being bought just to turn around and make a quick sale at a rescue at 5, 10, 12 times more than they actually paid, and these animals were never going. Now, that doesn't mean no animal that's in a broker lot is ever going to ship. What it means is that number is going to ship no matter how many you're willing to buy, if they want to keep their license. Now, a lot of times, these lots aren't even owned by actual licensed dealers. I mean, they're just horse traders that have capitalized on your good intentions to help. What those good intentions do, though, is it takes away money from real rescue, and it makes it cost far, far more to help a horse. If you reach out to a good rescue at any point, they can tell you and point you in the direction to help animals that are in critical need, that actually can be helped, that are not part of some type of scheme for far less money than the purchase of one or two of these horses that need bailed. Now, I tell people, if that's where your heart is and you've done your research and you understand exactly what's happening, that's up to you. You can do whatever you want, but we get so many questions about it that it just felt like time to better explain. So when we help a horse, our intake cost, is usually $0 beyond transport locally. Most of the animals come from animal control to us. And so then there's a process of the transport, of vetting, of rehab, and so forth. No matter what, those costs, you're going to have them. But if you add in a bail cost of $800, $1,200, plus then quarantining, which in an auction situation is necessary, in a situation where the horse has been on the same hill for 8 years by itself or with its pasture mate, that same type of extensive quarantining tends to not be needed. Think about how there's an infinite amount of need, it feels like. It feels like the need is all-consuming, but there's a particular amount of donor money able to help horses. And if we're not wise with how we use that, whether we're a donor, whether we are an animal or equine advocate, or whether we're an adopter, if we're not wise about how we're seeing that limited pool of money used, we're not doing the best we can for horses. If we decide to spend $1,500 just on acquiring the horse every single time that we acquire a horse in need, and then we need an additional $1,500 to $2,000 before we get that retrained and adoptable. If we're doing those types of things, we are, no matter how we want to look at it, we are absolutely helping fewer horses. And then all this time, we're lining the pockets and creating an industry that's going to fight harder and harder to keep it going. So if someone wants to see those types of things, if we want to see horses for human consumption ended, if we want to see that they aren't exported for that, you can have your opinion on that. This is not a debate. If people start debating under this, I'll just remove it, because that's not the debate here. But I am saying, if you want to see horses no longer exported for human consumption over our borders, the more you give to these schemes creating this hysteria around pulling horses from feedlots, and the more then you create a thriving new industry that has a hold that's going to fight even harder to keep anybody from ever ending that. So think about that when you give and when you want an animal helped. If you're funding the very thing that you're fighting against, I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? We don't want to do that. We don't want to fund the thing we want to end. And even the people that I know that are not anti-slaughter, they still are anti-feedlots. Actually not agree with us on one part of it, but still totally agree on the other part of the situation. Sonia, I preach this to my kids all the time. Yeah, I mean, and it's hard because we want people to be compassionate. I mean, I founded a horse rescue. Obviously, I love horses. I care about animal welfare, and I care about helping the largest amount of horses possible. And you can't do that if you're misusing your money and actually boosting the very thing you want to see ended. So Heart of Phoenix does not take part in broker lots. We don't take part in kill pen schemes. We don't do that. We don't do a lot of auction pulling, and there's different reasons as to why. Part of it is the auction that I mentioned before that was owned by a actual kill buyer is no longer in operation, and so we have to go far outside of our area, and the need here without going to the auction is so extensive that we just haven't felt the need to to go outside and attend auctions, to pull and purchase to bring them into the rescue, because the most fiscally responsible thing that we can do is rescue them when people are trying to turn them over to us left and right. And so that's just what we have found. Unfortunately for us, that's not necessarily what people love to donate to, because it lacks the drama and the fiend sense of urgency. And when you're wanting to give, you want to give when it's critical, and it seems like the last moment. So if you are giving, we have found that in the grand scheme of funding, had we decided to join that type of operation, we probably would have been better funded, but we have been sufficiently funded doing it in the way that we feel is the most responsible. So thank you guys who give for what we're doing instead of the other things. So for some reason or other, it usually I'm able to see questions on live stream, but I can't seem to see that. So if you ask questions or have comments, I can go back and answer them, or Susanna may go back and give you our position when this is done. I'm trying to think about an instance where to kind of show you a little bit about the type of horse that ends up with the kill buyer better than there's a lot of misinformation out there that says that the horses that are going to the kill pen and the slaughter horses are thin and old horses, or that they're horses priced to a certain point. But just understand, this is a business. They have to make money. If they have to rehab it, they're not making any money. If the horse is 500 pounds underweight, there's no money to be made when you're selling the horse by the pound. And if the horse is priced at $1,200, there's really no money to be made on those types of horses. So if a horse is going through an auction, and I've been to auctions, and you'll see all kinds of things. You see really nice horses going for really good prices to normal horse people, and you see really skinny horses or really sick horses going to the very bottom of the barrel purchasers, or these days some rescuers, and that's true. But now that was not the case when I was going to auctions in Appalachia 25 and 30 years ago. They were only going one place, and it was not good. But it wasn't to a kill buyer. It was to, kind of the hoarder that had $50, and they would starve that animal and it would die, and they would come back 2 weeks later and they would buy another horse. And that still happens at these lower end auctions. And then you would have the unhandled horses that were healthy, and maybe the more recently lame horses, but maybe a type of lameness that just didn't allow them to compete in what they had been doing, or maybe something that would heal and the horse would end up fine, but the person didn't bother with the diagnostics to know what was going to happen. But overall healthy horses, but priced low for those reasons. That was what the kill buyer tended to purchase. So Susanna, Da Vinci and Jake Fitty. Yeah. So I could tell you really quick the horses that we have gone in and pulled from auctions to give you a perspective. One that I always think about that really tells you the type of horse the kill buyer will and will not buy is, I was at an auction in Kentucky owned by a kill buyer, and this old mare went through. She was about 300 pounds underweight. She was an old Percheron mare. We named her Snow. And this was, I believe, 2012. She ran her through. She went as a no sale. Kill buyer right there in the pen. Could have bought her for $25. He didn't do it. It wasn't worth it to him. She was aged. She was really underweight. So after that ended, we went to the guy and we said, hey, would you take $50 for her? And he said yes. And so we bought her, rehabbed her. She lived about 5 more years in a sanctuary in Tennessee for primarily senior draft horses. So keep in mind, that horse, had there been people there it just wasn't a busy night. It was a cold night at the end of January, beginning of February 2012. Super cold, not many people there. She was not in danger of slaughter. She was in danger of going to somebody that just had 25 to 50 bucks to spend, that were going to tie her to a cinder block out behind their trailer until she starved to death, which is a pretty gruesome end. It's as gruesome as anything. And then, so that's one example of when a kill buyer passed a horse over. Now, we purchased the year before that. We were at that same auction, kill buyer right there, standing there in the pen, as they tend to. But he was the owner also, but ran a mare through, and she was about 75 pounds underweight, and ended up, I bid her to $125, and he passed her over. Bought her for $125. He did put one bid on her and then passed her over, and I was just actually outbidding the low end people on her. She was thin. She wasn't a fat horse in great shape. She was handleable though. Let's see. Susanna Johnson mentioned Da Vinci. Da Vinci was about 13.3, so pony size, really good weight. We did outbid a secondary kind of a person that buys horses to take to, say, New Holland or a bigger Sugar Creek. This horse would have ultimately, Da Vinci would have gone on to Sugar Creek. We bought him for $185 at a particular auction in Kentucky in 2018. So he was at the price point at that price for that year. He was profitable up to more than that, because he was worth buying to go flip and resell. He wasn't really handled, and he was a stallion. The horses that tend to be in those pens, you'll see young unhandled horses, horses that have some type of lameness that may be very difficult to see, and horses that are you'll see stallions in there that have been used a few times and not really given any manners. You'll see brood mares in there that haven't had a lot of training, or it's been a long time and nobody wants to check and see what's going on. But there are a lot of misses to the type of horse that ends up in the kill pen. And in my experience, it has been rare, and this is what the industry, concurs with me on this. It's rare that a horse that is very well trained, very healthy, with no issues ends up in a kill pen. It's just not how it usually goes. And if a horse appears that way, they probably did have a lameness that landed them there, and maybe it's healed and it actually could get a good diagnosis. And there's lots of reasons why, but usually it's an unhandled horse, or a horse that has gotten some serious behavioral issues or some health issues. So with that said, he was a kicker. Who was a kicker? Da Vinci? Susanna Johnson? He might have been. But he was unhandled, unstarted, and a stallion. So it was no wonder to me why he ended up there. So those are just some of the experiences we've had. I'm sure there are people that won't agree, and that's the beauty of life. You can make your own journey and figure it out. But for those that wanted to know our position and why we do it the way that we do, that is why. And so I appreciate y'all tuning in, and I'm going to hop off of here. Especially during this time where I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time at home, we hope to start doing these maybe daily about any type of topic, and just throw out things that you'd like to hear about. We have a pretty huge list. We have a pretty huge list of things people have asked us to talk about already. So that's for today, our subject matter, and maybe we'll do a spin-off on that if you all have enough questions. And otherwise, I'm going to go. Thank you guys, and have a lovely evening.